Hey gang, this podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. As you all know, this is a business that I started to give back more to conservation. We roast premium coffee and our coffee ships out within 6 hours of roasting, guaranteeing that you get the freshest coffee available at your doorstep. The kicker? We donate 10% of all of our proceeds back to conservation. You choose where the donation goes at checkout. You can check us out at skullbrewcoffee.com. And for a limited time, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and get 15% off your purchase. So let's do some good together and help protect wild places one cup at a time. Visit skullbrewcoffee.com and pledge your support of conservation today. Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 109. Today I'm joined by the DIY Sportsman, Garrett Prawl, and we're talking about DIY hacks for 2019. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to all of you out there. Hope everyone is doing just fine. Hope you're getting a chance to get out, as long as the weather will cooperate, to get out and do a little bit of shed hunting. I don't remember if I mentioned this on the last podcast that I put out, but I think I did actually mention it. I found my first shed. Haven't been able to get out since that last outing, but am kind of eagerly waiting and anticipating my trip to Iowa this week to visit my buddy Johnny Utah, and we'll see a couple other buddies out there. We'll be hitting up the Iowa Deer Classic, so that'll be a good time. Going to do a little shed hunting, a little scouting. So if you're listening to this on Wednesday or Thursday of this week when this podcast launches, I will be en route, in flight to Iowa to meet up with John. The plan really is to hit the Iowa Deer Classic. I think we're going to record a couple podcasts while we're there. If you listen to just a few podcasts ago, we did a roundtable with John, myself, and Cody DeQuisto, and Chad Sylvester, of course. And I think we're going to do a round 2 of that. So if you have questions you would like for us to answer, be it hunting related, personal life related, funny anecdotes, or whatever you might have, we'll be happy to answer those on the podcast. So that's the plan for this upcoming week, is to do that. A couple podcasts while we're there, a little shed hunting, and then definitely going to do some scouting of the couple pieces of public that I want to hit that I'm probably going to end up hunting whenever I head out there in late October, early November this year. So that's really kind of the game plan for this week. It's going to be, they're actually having a little warmer weather, and when I say warmer weather, I guess temperature for Iowa, warmer is relative, so it's in like the mid 30s, I think, this week. But of course, when I get there, it's going to drop to the teens, so that'll make for some fun shed hunting. But nonetheless, we'll power through it. Going to do a little scouting while I'm there. Hopefully, we find some good intel. We're going to hit up a couple of John's leases as well, and do some shed hunting there. Hopefully, I have enough bone that I pick up during the course of the trip that I'll have to ship it back to my house. So that's the plan. I'm not going to hold my breath on that, since I'm not the world's best shed hunter. But as far as, there was one thing I wanted to make mention of on this podcast as part of the upfront. It was something that actually my wife put together. She's starting to make, I guess, more of an entrance into this podcast more and more recently. As you guys know, we have the coffee thing going on, and then conservation is an important topic, I think, for all hunters, and I've kind of taken it upon myself to do as much as I can possibly do, and to try to find ways to do more. And my wife kind of got into the fold as well. And so one thing that we did just the other day, actually, as I'm recording this up front, I guess we had it yesterday, was we actually threw and this might seem kind of bougie, but we actually threw a wine tasting party and wild game tasting. And what we did essentially was we found this company. I'll give them a shameless plug here, but it's called One Hope Wine Company. I think they're national. I think most of their stuff's out of California or Napa, but they have, I think regional representatives and stuff like that. But the company's kind of built around the basis of giving back to different charitable organizations whenever they, when they sell wine, essentially. So everything from children's hospitals to help fund research for different rare diseases and stuff like that. So overall, just an all around good company. And then they do have some, each bottle of wine kind of represents a cause, essentially. And I believe there are some that are related to the outdoors as well. So we actually hooked up with them and said, hey, why don't we throw a wine tasting party? And then a portion of the proceeds for, anyone who bought wine during our party goes to a nonprofit organization of our choice. And so we chose a local conservancy that is local to where my wife and I live, to give back to them in that regard. So that was kind of the cool part number one of it, I guess, is that we were going to be able to do something kind of fun with our friends, and everyone can kind of buy some wine, have a good time, and then of course their purchase is helping to do some good in the world of conservation. So that was really cool. The other cool thing that we did was that we paired it with the wine tasting with trying different wild game, and then we purposefully kind of looked at our group of friends and tried to have like a mix of folks who are hunters, or hunting enthusiasts, and then also pair, groups as well, bring other groups of our friends in that are non-hunters and may be opposed to hunting, or just maybe don't know much about hunting and don't understand maybe our relevance to conservation overall. So that was really kind of became the goal number two, was let's introduce a lot of these folks who may not have much exposure to hunting, the hunting culture, or wild game, and use the wild game kind of tasting as a means to have dialogue around it, because inevitably they're going to ask questions about where it came from, who harvested it, how did it get here, so on and so forth. So what we ended up preparing was, of course, we had venison from a deer that I took this year. We had some moose backstrap that we actually made into skewers. So that was from my friend Wilson, who you guys have heard on the podcast. He and his father-in-law harvested a moose in Alaska. And then we had some duck and goose as well. We made like a duck goose confit, which is kind of bougie, I know, but it tastes really good. And so that was and we had some venison sausage as well. So that was kind of the game plan. And man, I'll tell you what, it couldn't have went off any better. Everyone had a great time. Much wine was consumed. Wine was purchased, so we were able to give it back to conservation. But more importantly, there was just all kinds of really cool discussion and conversation that was being had. For the most part, Wilson and I were the two folks in the room that were hunters. So he and I fielded a lot of questions about hunting, about particularly where the game came from, how we hunted them, how we processed them. And there were some folks in the room who, just being truthful, that weren't necessarily big fans of hunting per se. And they left with a different perspective. Which was really cool. Like one person actually mentioned as they were leaving that, they hope that, folks like them who are non-hunters have an encounter with, have a similar encounter and experience as they had last evening, to get to know a little bit more about hunting and, from folks who are passionate about it. So that was really cool. It was, someone who I wouldn't have expected to say that. So I feel like we've done a good job, and we maybe enlightened some folks last evening to the point that they wanted to have a similar function at their house, and kind of have some hunters and some non-hunters there, and have a different type of cuisine, and have open dialogue around those topics, as well as around vegetarianism and stuff like that. So it was just really cool, because I saw a lot of people's minds kind of change, and I think the important thing, the lesson for me was that just going into situations with an open mind and willing to learn new things, even if it's something that I'm unfamiliar with. So I'll get off my soapbox now for the moment. I just want to make mention of that, because that's an easy way, if anyone out there is looking to give back, but maybe you don't have a lot of time or whatever, this is a really easy, fun way to give back. One Hope Wine sets everything up. They bring the wine, you purchase at like a discount rate, and then you sample the wine, and then whatever it is that you want to prepare for like your fair and stuff like that. So you just kind of throw a party and they show up and kind of help run it. So I'd definitely check them out, and I'd definitely give it a try if it's something that you're interested in. But with that, we have a cool show today. The show today is with Garrett Prawl of DIY Sportsman, and I've wanted to have him on for a little while. Yeah, I've been guilty of falling down the wormhole of his YouTube channel, looking at all kinds of different hacks for hacking gear, climbing mechanisms, you name it. He's got it on his YouTube page, as far as different ways to modify gear, and he does everything from simple rope mods to the dude has built his own sticks, his own climbing sticks. So Super knowledgeable guy when it comes to hacking and building DIY kind of tools to get it done in the field. He's also a very mobile hunter. He's hunted, from a stand and from a tree saddle. So it's like he has, a perspective of both and what each hunter might want or need and what, works best for him in both of those applications. So super cool to have him on and really excited to share this podcast with you guys. But before we jump into all that, let's take care of the business end of this jam real quick and talk about a couple of our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. We're brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear, the longest lasting, fastest cutting, toughest tree trimming equipment you have ever used. Simply put, the toughest saws on earth. How tough are they? Tough enough to come with a lifetime warranty. And right now, when you visit wickedtreegear.com, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and get a 20% discount on your Wicked purchase. We're also brought to you by Glacier Coolers, simply the world's finest. Whether you're hunting, camping, or fishing, you'll enjoy stronger design, smarter construction, and superior insulation of Glacier Coolers. Visit them at glaciercoolers.com. Promo code TRUTH at checkout. Save yourself 20%. And now let's get Garrett on the line. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And I'm super stoked for today's show. My guest is none other than the DIY Sportsman's Garrett Prawl. Did I say your last name right? I should have asked that before we started. Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
I'm always embarrassed whenever I butcher someone's last name when we do these. but no, Garrett has a great channel on YouTube, the DIY Sportsman's, and a podcast where he looks at ways to kind of lighten the load per se, and trying to figure out new and better ways to utilize gear or refine gear. But before we get into all that, thanks for joining, Garrett. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet, man. So before we get into all the nitty gritty of the DIY stuff, I just want to get a little bit of background about you. Where you're from, what you do professionally, and kind of what your gig is in the whitetail world.
Yeah, so I guess my day job, the job that pays the bills, I do medical device product development. So that's what most of my time is consumed by, and then in kind of my free time, that's where the passions kind of come through, and it's all whitetails and turkeys and anything else I can get out in the woods and do.
Right, and you're hailing from the cold state of Minnesota, right?
Yep, the brutally cold state of Minnesota.
Yeah.
Land of 10,000 lakes, all of which are frozen.
Hey, they make good butter though. At least I've heard they make good butter. I remember my growing up, that was the butter that was always in my house, was the Land of Lakes, and I never had a clue that it was actually. I just thought it was a clever name. I didn't realize. I think that it was actually made in Minnesota. So. Cool, man. So I know that we're here at the end of hunting season, right? I just wrapped mine up yesterday. It was the last sit. But how was your season overall? I know I did see the video that you put out with your Missouri hunt, which looked like it ended pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I really had a great season. Just in terms of, I was able to do a lot more traveling to different areas and get new experiences than I've done in the past. So that aspect of it was really enjoyable. Nice. I ended up took 3 deer total throughout the entire season, 2 of which were does, 1 of which was that buck that you saw from Missouri, and hunted 3 different states and multiple different locations within those states. So I really had a blast overall.
Nice. So you got plenty of timber time. I know we were talking before we started recording that timber time for us working stiffs is sometimes a challenge. I often say I would trade promotion for more time off in many cases, at least for me.
Oh yeah, yeah. Funny you say that, because I've been looking at various, like, the next level up for me is either to get, deeper into project management or to go into some type of management position. And I keep looking at those management type jobs. I'm like, do I really want that? Is that really what I want, long term?
Yeah.
Just because that automatically just takes so much of your time away from anything else.
It does. It's interesting because you look at it and you're like, you get out of some of the day-to-day stuff, right? Which is, I do plenty of day-to-day stuff, but I have folks who work with me that handle a lot of that work, and I manage them. So, but you're right, it does take up a lot more of your time. There is a little bit more freedom that comes along with it, right? Because you can kind of, I don't want to say make your own schedule, but a lot of the work that I'm having to do doesn't necessarily require me to be there per se, right? So I can kind of work from home. And I will take advantage of those opportunities where, say, for example, if I'm traveling, if I know I'm going to Ohio to hunt for like a weekend or whatever, I might leave Thursday after work, get to Ohio like Thursday night, wake up, hunt Friday morning, work remotely from Ohio like all day, and then try to cut out a little bit early and get an evening hunt in. You know what I mean? So I'm already in the state. So there are some perks. It's just when you come back, there's just like an avalanche of work all at your feet when you get back, which isn't any fun to take care of. But so I know that you were part of the public land challenge this year with the guys from the Beast, and yourself, of course, and the hunting public crew. So I'm just kind of curious, man, because I know I had on Alex Comstock, and I know he was out for part of that gig. And I'm just kind of curious to hear what different people's perspective of that situation was and what your overall experience was like.
Yeah, I mean, for the hunting aspect of it, it was fun to learn the new terrain. I've hunted in similar terrain, but that region of the state is different enough that the hills are bigger, the terrain is steeper than some of the other bluff country I've been in, and I think just overall in general there's a lot more deer, and there was a lot bigger deer running around. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were easier, but it was definitely fun to go to a region of the state like that where it's a little bit better opportunity, I feel like, especially in the early season, than some of the other places. Just a lot of really, really great habitat. And then from the aspect of just kind of being in that group and having that camaraderie, I thought it was a blast. I mean, the way that they title it, Public Land Challenge, and there's a little bit of, is it going to be kind of a competition, one team versus the other? But it really didn't feel like that at all. I mean, it was kind of like everybody was just swapping stories and sharing experiences and, asking questions of each other. It was really a great atmosphere.
Yeah, I know. It was funny you mentioned that, because the title was just a little misleading, because it's like, I've had the opportunity and to talk to both Dan and the guys from the Hunting Public and stuff like that, and you literally could not meet or talk to a nicer group of people. Dan's personality is fun. He's interesting. He seems kind of gruff at first until like you start to talk to him, and then he's just like one of the most giving people you would ever meet in the hunting community. And at first glance, you might not get that, right? So that's kind of like the classic "don't judge a book by its cover," because he probably wouldn't favor anyone saying this, but he's a little bit of a teddy bear. You know what I mean? Like, he's got a little soft spot for guys who want to learn deer hunting and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But so I'm curious, man, what was your biggest takeaway from hunting with that bunch of with that group, man? Because there were some straight up killers in that group. So I'm sure there were some things that you picked up on while you were with them.
So there's, I guess, two things that really stood out. One was just the level of detail and picking up the little things that a lot of those guys go into. I mean, a lot of guys are now up to speed where they've learned the basics. They know, what to look for in terms of bedding, in terms of, active food sources and various terrain funnels and all that kind of stuff. But what stands out to you when you hunt with a group like that is how they pick up on just the tiniest amount of things, like, hey, this rub was made within the last couple of days, or that rub is a week old. I'm not paying attention to that anymore. Mm-hmm. These tracks were made this morning. These tracks could have been here for several days, and really just being able to pick out what is hot absolutely right now, and just, staying mobile to the point where you just keep moving around and keep scouting until you find something that's hot. I mean, right. A lot of those guys also were just kind of running around hunting different spots every day, and sometimes not even really putting in like a legit hunt until they found what they thought was, actually worthwhile. And I think the other thing that stood out was that, you would think that people who have as much experience as that group did, they would all kind of have very similar styles. And there are certainly similarities, but even within the group, every individual that would go out had their own unique way of doing things, their own little unique twist. Like Zach likes hunting on the ground, so that was a big part of what they did. Zach and Jake and Dan pretty much stuck to what he knew he could be really successful at and did really well, right? So everybody kind of had their own little unique spin, which was really interesting to watch. There's kind of no best way. It's kind of what you make of it. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because it's like doing the podcast thing. It's like you get to talk to a lot of folks, and you notice themes, right? And one of the big themes that I've always noticed exactly is what you said. It was like the detail in their scouting, right? Their ability to kind of take, very what you would look at as almost like information that's easily overlooked, and it becomes important to them or significant in how they're going to make a move or how they're going to set up or whatever. The other thing too, though, that I really kind of talked about, and this actually came up whenever I was talking with Zach, was just like having the confidence to, when you do see something and that that it's important, to actually act on it, right? Because that's, I think, the part that I'm still trying to get, if I'm being 100% honest. Yep. It's like I'll find the right sign, and I know what I'm looking at, but I just won't I don't believe the hype, so to speak, and it bit me this year during pre-rut, where I found what I thought was on my dad's property, which was kind of a relatively new property. I found what I thought was an area where one of the bucks that I was after was bedding, and I found a primary scrape area, that was just, there was a one main scrape and like 4 to 6 satellite scrapes all within like a 20-yard area, and just trees tore up, and then there was a bunch of bedding behind it, and I was like, you know what, he's probably bedding here underneath a big white oak tree with acorns too. So I was like, how much more choice could you get? And I went to kind of do a little bit more scouting, and I left that spot, and like in hindsight, like the day later, I was like, oh my God, I was like, I can't believe I walked away from that spot, and ended up hanging and hunting somewhere else. And it was just like one of those things where I was looking at the sign going like, man, that's less than 24 hours old. Some of those scrapes, because there were still shavings on the ground and stuff like that. And I was like, man, this is the spot, and I left it. So I think a big part of it is just believing what you're seeing too, and that just comes with experience in doing it.
Yeah. In-season scouting is so huge. I mean, there's been a lot of times where I've gotten sucked into how good a spot looked during postseason scouting, and it might be really good for a certain period of time. It might be one of those real deep spots, and you get in there, and it's like you just have the memories of all the stuff that you saw in that, March or April scouting, and then you actually get set up, and it's like, I kind of expected more sign, but you end up hunting it anyway, and you might not see anything, and it's like so much of it, you just gotta trust what you see then and there, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Because it's like in that scenario, I just had someone ask me that on social media, and my response was kind of like, yeah, I like to scout during the postseason, or after the season ends, because I want to get a sense of like where deer have been. I was like, but I think a lot of people make a mistake and they use that as almost the gospel, because you don't know if that sign was laid down in September, October, November. It's like, and you could either be early to the party or late to the party, depending on when that sign was laid down. I think the other big thing that I took away from those dudes too was their willingness to bump deer and not be too worried about how much they are pressuring the deer. Like, they'll be concerned about the people around them and the pressure that's being created around them. But if there's a particular deer they're after, they're not worried about what's happening to the satellite or ancillary deer, as long as that deer that they're after is not being impacted, which I thought was kind of interesting. I know Zach has mentioned if you bump a buck, it's like he doesn't want to do that, but that's the best information you'll ever get, because you knew what he was doing right then and there. That's where he was at. And bumping him one time probably doesn't move him off that spot.
Right. And what I've heard also from guys that have hunted bedded deer a lot is that the older a deer gets, the less likely he will relocate after getting bumped, because if you bump him, he got away. It's like in his mind, he won. And
right.
He just confirmed even further that bedding spot that he had picked out was a good spot to be in.
Right. And now it's just a matter of figuring out how's he entering and how's he exiting. Right. And the exit's usually relatively easy, because that's usually the straight line path right out of their bed. You know what I mean? If coming out, especially if it's the evening, they're coming out probably toward a food source, if it's not during the rut, of course, which they're not, probably not going to catch them bedded very often during that time. But yeah, man, it's always good to talk to those guys, because it's like it's like an education every time, and trying to like pick up the pieces. I find myself going back and listening to those podcasts, going like, now what did he say here? And let me write this down this time, So, but with that, man, let's go ahead and dive into some of the stuff that some of the stuff that you're into, man. So the first things first, man. It's like, so I'm just gonna be honest. I'm one of the probably the most least mechanically inclined people you might ever meet in your life when it comes to building things, which makes my wife nervous when I say that I'm going to DIY my hunting gear and I'm going to be hanging from a tree 20 feet in the air. But with that, when did you start DIYing your gear, and what was the motivation behind it?
So I think probably, even when I think back to like when I was a kid, like I was a big fisherman, and I would be like in my garage taking like a little piece of pine wood and like a pocket knife and trying to like whittle out like a fishing lure to be able to use. So I was always kind of inclined to making my own stuff. Mm-hmm. As far as hunting, probably I'd say like when I was 16 or 17 is when I really started making a lot of my own stuff. Like after the point where I had, kind of made the initial purchases and then started to say like, well, I want something different. Can I save a little bit of money and just make this thing myself? Mm-hmm. It's like at the beginning, a lot of it was I can't afford whatever I want. So can I make it in some way? And right. Now it's kind of evolved to, maybe I'm trying to save money, but that's not really the biggest thing. Oftentimes now, if I'm trying to DIY something, it's because maybe whatever I want doesn't exist. And so the only way to have it is to make it myself.
Right. What do you think was the biggest, I guess, modification you've ever made, like to a piece of gear, where it's like you literally took it from whatever the purchase was, or maybe it's something that you built from the ground up. It ended up taking a completely different shape either than what you had initially bought or that you just developed.
If you look at like my fourth arrow camera arm from when I initially got it to what it looks like now, there's like only a couple components that are original. I've changed so many things on that. But yeah, for like the safety equipment, like tree stands and stuff, there's been like minor modifications. Oftentimes those I'm a little bit more leery of making like big structural changes. But then like anything like strap related, for gear or anything like that, I really changed a lot of stuff around on those type of things because they're pretty low risk. And so they're just fun to work with too.
Right. Now, where are you coming up with these innovations? I mean, are you seeing kind of like different conversations about what maybe people are looking for, or is it something that you're noticing yourself, or because I know there's a lot of just as I'm new first year into saddle hunting, I see on the Saddle Hunter forum, it's just chock full of guys who are just constantly making their own gear. And I know like saddle hunting was one of those things until, recently it was not something that had a lot of on market, pieces or in market pieces specific to saddle hunting. So it was kind of the nature of the style. But, where are you coming up with some of these ideas like to start to, break new ground?
Yeah. So it's a mix. I mean, a lot of it, like you said, I've been involved in various forums and Facebook pages once Facebook became a thing for so long that there's constantly guys sharing stuff. And sometimes seeing something new, maybe you like certain aspects of it or it sparks some new idea that says, hey, maybe I could do that, but this way, make it a little bit different. And I think some of the innovation that you've even seen over like the last several years, like especially in terms of saddles, like you mentioned, it's like between like 5 years ago and now, just a constant influx of ideas that it's kind of like a small company working together and bouncing ideas off of one another. And people are able to take little bits and pieces and then throw in their own little thing and try things and have things fail and then have things succeed. And then it's just really, this whole social media age has really, I think, sparked really rapid development in a lot of those things.
Yeah, for sure, man.
So a lot of it is just like seeing other people's ideas and just kind of making tweaks. Some of it too is just, when you're sitting in the stand and you're thinking about stuff, it's like, oh, well, what if this thing was shaped like this? Or what if it was put together this way,
Yeah. We often have a lot of time to sit and think. That's for sure.
Exactly.
So that's interesting. It's almost like a little entrepreneurial business or like a startup, like the communities are, right? Because it's constant ideation. I think that's a good way to frame it. So leads me to another question, which is, have you ever thought about like essentially doing that? Like, cause you have like the aptitude, from your background, I know it's like in a form of engineering and stuff like that. Have you ever kind of considered starting to kind of build something from scratch and see about taking it to market?
I've thought about it a few times. I think what I personally be more interested in is trying to license ideas versus actually trying to make and sell something.
Yeah.
But for me, it would have to be something that's just an absolute home run for me to have the confidence to move forward with it, just because I do have a pretty good day job going on.
Yeah.
So to be able to do something on the side and be able to invest a lot of money and savings into it would really take something that I think is high, high confidence, low risk.
Right.
And I just haven't had that thing. And the other thing too is like you look at what I was using 5 years ago and thought was really cool, and what I use now, it's like there's a constant evolution.
Yeah.
So what's to say if I make something cool, somebody else isn't going to come out with something in another 6 months that I go and think like, oh, I do like that actually better than what I had before. Right. So I'm just kind of riding the wave and getting all these new ideas and trying to constantly improve.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really valid point, man, because this space is just chock full of, just, going to ATA every year, it's like you see the advancement of like a product, and then like if it was a hot product the following year, there's 4 companies just like that came out and then but put their own spin on it, right? So it's a constant.
Right.
I don't want to say it's a copycat league, but it kind of is. You know what I mean? Something's hot, someone else tries to figure out a way they can manufacture it, cheaper, make it better, make it a little bit different, make it more specific to a particular audience, et cetera. It's kind of the whole marketing game. Kind of speaking of that, I know that we were both at ATA. I know you had a chance to sit down with Cody and those guys from the Lone Wolf Custom Gear. So there's a place where they're making advancements in tree stands. Like, what's your take on their overall system?
So I like the system. I think what they are doing is cutting edge again.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of how they've, like back when they did the original cast aluminum, right? That was like a huge change to the market.
Right.
And now that they're trying to machine stuff, and I know that like Dan is machining stuff too. It's like that's, I think, another really big thing that's going to be not just a change for their products in particular, but it could be a trend in the industry. We've seen, how many times over the last several years somebody's come out with something that is really high priced and people are like, oh, nobody's going to pay for that. Like with, like Yeti or Sika or something. But time and time again, people prove that they're willing to pay for something that they think is the best.
Yeah.
So I think they definitely have something there. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years how other people try to, mimic or copy or do whatever. I do think that it is high enough price that it's going to cut a lot of people out just right off the bat.
Yeah.
But having held some of that stuff in my hand and looking at some of the ideas that went into it, I was talking with Cody, and he said that was like the stand that they had at ATA was like the 14th prototype that they'd machined and done changes to it, trying to make little tweaks every time. So they definitely, you don't always see like bits and pieces. They're not posting, stuff on social media like, oh, we're working on this, but it's like in the background, you get the feeling that those guys are always tweaking and always doing stuff just kind of in the shadows until they feel like they have something that's really next level.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely cool. It's definitely cool stuff. For me, I guess I look at it like this, and just this is just my lens, where if I'm focused, and I am, on hunting as light and as mobile as I can, and I pretty much hunt for the most part. I have some family properties and stuff like that, but I think this year in total, out of all the hunts I did 3 sits on the family property, and even there, it's 3+ hours away. So even there, it's like I'm not hanging stands and letting them. It's like every stand or every sit is a hang and a hunt. And if I'm doing that, it's like I just have a hard time fathoming like a better way to do it than hunting out of a saddle, because it's the lightest, the most mobile. There's no restrictions with trees or diameter of trees for the most part. As long as it'll hold your body weight, you're pretty good to go. The sticks were intriguing to me, but I look at it like you're doing this innovation in this space, and I think it's great. And I think it is innovative. I mean, the stuff is super light. I think what they did to kind of make the sticks more packable was really cool. And that was the one place where I was like, the sticks would be something that I would look at as a potential climbing method. Mm-hmm. But with that mobile community being so, DIY, right? Always kind of looking to shave an ounce, shave a pound, shave bulk or whatever. It's like, I mean, I already started seeing posts on social media where people were figuring out like how to remake the seat that flips up to carry a pack. You know what I mean? Like they were already kind of hacking those things. And so I'm looking at it going, I think those are great things, but when you innovate like that, you're really kind of innovating for like that, and knowing that your audience is kind of that DIY audience too. It's like, how many of them are just going to say, oh, instead of paying this, I'm just going to hack this because I can make this work this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely take a risk there. I think that too, there's always going to be, like, of course we got the small little niche community that loves like DIY and stuff, like all the pictures you see that pop up with like recreating what they saw at ATA and stuff. I think that's awesome. But I think there's also another large group that just, like you said, is not mechanically inclined. And I think that group is bigger than sometimes we imagine, because they're the guys who aren't posting on social media. So I think there's still going to be those people that would rather just buy something than actually make it.
Right.
But how many of those people are there? I really don't know. Yeah. And I think too, one of the things that's going to be hard for people to recreate is just the strength to weight increase that you're able to get with machining versus like a cast stand. Yeah. Like if you were to chop up some other cast stand, like a Lone Wolf, original or something like that, like there's only so much you can do without, making some safety compromises.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. I mean, I thought it was a super cool piece, and there's definitely going to be people out there that want to pick them up. I have no doubt that'll be the case. I think the way that they're kind of framing it too is the right approach, because I heard Andre, a couple times while I was standing there, where he was saying that, he mentioned, someone asked how much they were, and he mentioned the price point, and he was like, look, he's like, the person who's buying this isn't buying 3 or 4 to hang around their farm. They're buying one, and this should last them the next, like, probably the rest of their years hunting, essentially. You know what I mean? So if you look at it from that perspective as an investment, it's like, and you're going to use something for 10 to 20 years. It's like, is $800 for a setup really all that much? Probably not. You know what I mean? All things considered, but it's that initial sticker shock and outlay of cash.
Right. Which is right. There definitely is that. I mean, to put it in reference though, like my Lone Wolf Assault that I have, I bought that thing in like 2005. So I've been using that thing for 14 years now.
Yeah. exactly. So you definitely got your return on investment.
Right.
With that. Awesome. So I'm curious, man, as you're kind of, tweaking things and making things anew and making things that weren't before, what type of testing are you doing on something that you've kind of modified before you actually take it out and do a hunt with it? Especially if it's something that's going to be, like safety critical, I guess is one way to put it.
So if it's something that's safety related, before I even do the mod, as much as possible, I like to actually run through the numbers and do the math, or do like the finite element analysis to see if it's going to be sketchy or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the advantages that having a background in engineering gives you is just the ability to look at something and know kind of through experience what looks like it. You'll be able to tell what things will work and won't work just by how the stresses are going to be, located and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that definitely helps in the front end in terms of like not just, it reduces the number of failures you have to go through to get to the right spot. So oftentimes I'll do that just on the front end before I even start building. But once I actually build something and I want to test it out, usually what I'll do is I'll just take it to the backyard and try it at ground level, and just kind of put it through the paces, put it on various size trees, got some angled trees that I'll test stuff on, and just try to see, if somebody my weight, if it's going to be, if there's flex, if there's, any kind of issues, if it's like a climbing stick mod, I'll take the stick apart after, standing and bouncing around on it to see if anything bent or if there's, any kind of warping or anything like that. Definitely safety related things. It pays to, in my opinion, do as much due diligence as possible on the front end before you actually take it up to 20 feet.
Yeah, it could definitely get a little. I like how you mentioned sketch. Like, I don't remember what the terminology is you just use for assessing it, but I would call that the sketch variable in my book. Is what it would be called. But yeah, I think growing up, as growing up hunting, I think we've all kind of stepped on some sketch stands in the past where it's like I look at them now and I'm like, man, there's no way you'd get me into that stand today, And then you have my old man, of course, who's like, "Oh, that stand looks fine." I'm like, "Dad, those cables are rusted. Like they're ready to break like at any moment." He's like, "Oh, it's good. It'll be fine." So what's the one area of hunting gear that you think, when you look out there across the great sea of hunting gear, stands, sticks, saddles, whatever the case might be, bows, releases, what's the one place where you see, that, I guess, gear that could use the most innovation currently?
Yeah, I think that probably the biggest thing is just anything that involves electronics at this point. I mean, we've gotten to the point where clothing has gone through the paces, and now we have high-tech clothing that's really good, way better than what we had years ago. The mobile systems, tree stands, climbing sticks, saddles, over the last 5 years are going through those paces. I think over the next few years they're going to continue to really get optimized, like we have seen with clothing. Anything like the mapping softwares and stuff like Onyx and anything like that. What a game changer that kind of stuff has been. I think, like, as far as mapping is concerned, the only way to really get better than what we have now is to be able to like utilize like drones, which I think are outlawed in many places, even during the hunting season. But like that's really the only way you can do any better than what we have with like Onyx or anything else like that. But just being able to look at various aerial photos from various times of the year from various sources and be able to kind of analyze those and look at 3D views, look at topo lines overlaid on aerials, overlaid with private land boundaries. It's just been a game changer for how you're able to gather info on the front end, and once you actually put boots in the ground, go back and look at it again and see how the big picture works together. I think the biggest thing is just things like trail cameras, right? Like, it seems like with trail cameras, you have to pay for quality, or if you try and skimp on quality, like the reliability just isn't always there. So that's like a big thing for me is like, when are we going to get to the point where you can buy, a sub $100 trail camera or a sub $200 cell camera and actually like have really good reliability with those type of cameras? That would be something I think it'll probably get there over time, but in my opinion, it's still not really quite there yet.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that is those things oftentimes move at a pace of what I'll just call like normal consumer products, right? Because we're really borrowing technology. If we're talking a cell camera, we're borrowing technology from, cameras. We're borrowing the camera industry. We're borrowing technology from cellular companies and stuff like that. So it's like as they evolve and advance, those industries are able to evolve and advance because, I'm not saying anything I don't think that you don't already know, but it's like, the hunting industry, innovative companies aren't flush with cash to the point to do their own R&D, right? It's like they have to rely on kind of consumer products that have, that make $400 million a year, $1 billion a year or whatever, to see what they're going to invest in and how can you then start to leverage those, innovations and those changes, right? So it's always we always get kind of the trickle down effect, I guess is what I'm saying, in the hunting industry. You bring up like the technology piece, right? And when I say technology,
Yep.
I'll say digital specifically because technology doesn't always have to be digital.
Yep.
How far do you think? I'll ask it this way: where do you think in your mind is the line of fair chase, given all the stuff that we have at our disposal? Like, we have the maps, right? That we can take a look at aerial, information and topo lines, and we can get weather data and all that stuff. We have trail cameras.
Yep.
We can see moon phase, wind direction, barometer, along with the deer's video to understand which way they're coming from and at what time of day. Like it's cell cameras, which can give you a ping and let you know when a deer passed a certain point, so
Yep.
feasibly it's like if he beds over here and he's got to pass this area, it's like you could get that ping and know he's 500 yards away from his bed, and maybe you're in a position where you can get there within the time it take him to go 500 yards. I don't know. So
Right.
at what point are we kind of passing that point of fair chase in your mind?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think on an individual level, if you think it's kind of sketchy, then it is not fair chase
Right.
for you as an individual, right? Like,
Right.
if some guy thinks that even just like a regular old, plain Jane trail camera gives him too much of an advantage, then don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think kind of on the macro scale and a little bit bigger level, I think we just need to. I'm always a little bit leery of in-season technology, right?
Mhm.
Like out-of-season technology to be able to learn the landscape, learn those type of things. Like, I don't know. I personally don't care like what people use.
Right.
But like in season where you're able to get live information that could really give you a big advantage, I think we just kind of have to look at it in terms of how it's affecting our overall harvest rates and say, hey, if since this technology has really gone mainstream, success percentages have gone up by X number of percent. Maybe we need to look at limiting this technology, or else we have the flip side effect where they have to start reducing availability of tags or that type of thing.
Right.
So I think it would make sense to kind of look at it as objectively as we can and kind of look at the numbers to see what is too big of an advantage and what is not. If people assume that something's going to be too big of an advantage, but really there's no effect on success,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe it isn't as big of an advantage as we previously would have assumed it would have been.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because that you bring up the harvest numbers, because I just kind of took a sneak peek through the most recent QDMA whitetail report just out of curiosity. And I always kind of like focus on my home state and stuff like that because I want to see what's going on. But over the past, I think that looks at it from a 3-year like window, and the harvest numbers for 2.5-year-old bucks or 3.5-year-old bucks or whatever, like they're all pretty similar as far as like the overall like aggregate data, which is interesting knowing that we've had significant technology advances just in the past 3 years. I'm always kind of torn, man, because I 100% agree with you where it's like I don't necessarily want it to get to a point to where it's affecting in-season hunts, which totally makes sense. But even like if you look at Montana, it's like they used to have a no trail camera policy in season during like in September once elk season hit. And I think just this past year, maybe 2 years ago, they've removed that to where you can now run trail cameras during, in season. So even those states who are looked at as being like the staples of fair chase, so to say, right? Or their economy is, I won't say based, but they have a large portion of their economy is based on their wildlife and natural resources, or even still moving away from it. And the part that I kind of struggle to kind of balance is that I want it to be as fair as possible, right? But if we look at hunting on the whole and knowing that our hunting numbers are dwindling, like what do we have to do to entice those who maybe aren't as skilled, don't have enough time to develop the skill, right, to dedicate to it, but we want them to be involved in the hunting culture because they're an important part of it to, increase our numbers and make sure that the lifestyle stays viable and so forth. And if technology and and loosening the reins on quote unquote fair chase is how you do it. Like, it's like I'm torn between like I'm torn between the old man saying get off my lawn and the rational person going like, if it can help people get into the funnel and continue to enjoy the thing that we have, then I have less of a problem with it. So I'm just, what do you think of that kind of perspective?
No, I think it's a good way to look at it. There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if we try and make it as old school as possible and try and outlaw as much technology as we can to keep it most fair chase, that might become less and less appealing to the newer generations. And hunting may eventually lose the kind of, political pull that it even currently has. So I think that, yeah, it's tough. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
It's a difficult question.
Yeah, I think it's just at this point, use responsibly, right? And one of the ways maybe is, these, like the record books or whatever, whether it's, Boone and Crockett, Pope and Young, whatever. It's like, maybe they start to put some regulations in and around like how something is harvested and what type of, tools are being used. And I mean, the trail camera thing would be hard to enforce or regulate, because you wouldn't know whether someone had pictures of them beforehand or not, or if they were on a cell camera or not. But, maybe it starts at that level and you start to figure out how to implement it in other ways. And maybe that's kind of like a testing ground. I don't know, but you're right. It is kind of a loaded topic, right? Because it's like, you don't want to cut your nose off to spite your face, but you also don't want to, be disrespectful to the animal and the hunt overall.
Right. Well, the other thing to look at it too is like, I don't know how many millions of dollars the hunting industry is worth, in terms of like the gear and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's like, you don't need much to be able to have a successful hunt. If people, use just like generic clothes, use the same bow for 10 years, like all this kind of stuff, and just not putting that many dollars into the industry, at what point does that hurt the industry enough where it starts to die down enough? And again, you're losing the kind of that political power. So that's kind of another way to look at the problem.
Yeah, it's multifaceted.
Like maybe it helps us to keep spending money.
Yeah. Exactly. It's multifaceted and probably above my pay grade at this point, but it's interesting to talk about. So, what are your? So I think I mentioned this before we started recording, but it's like I've fallen down the rabbit hole of your YouTube channel for hours on end, looking through all kinds of DIY hacks for any assortment of things. Some things that I'll probably never do, but I just continue to watch it out of just, like, how is he going to do this, or what is this next, hack consist of? So what are your top or your favorite saddle hunting, DIY hacks, since that's like the thing that I'm most interested in?
Yeah. So I think for one of the big things over the last couple of years has been the advent of people figuring out you can use ascenders for lineman's belts. Mm-hmm. The Rope Man one is the one I currently use. That has been just a total game changer for me and how I'm able to utilize that lineman's rope to be able to climb the tree. And there are other options for doing that kind of one-handed adjustment for the lineman's rope. Guys in the tree climbing community, arborists, they have more rope-like methods, mm-hmm. Where you're able to still use kind of that rope hitch and just kind of have like a tender to be able to lift against the hitch, so you don't have to use that all mechanical device. So there's other ways of doing it, but it just seems like everything I've tried, that just the simple, small, non-bulky mechanical ascender seems to work really well. For just carrying gear, so like part of it, you just got to think about like not only what gear you're carrying, but also how you're using it and what the process is for climbing the tree, hunting out of the tree, getting back down. For the longest time, I've always just kind of had one of those hip belt pouches that you can get for any kind of just random like frame pack, mm-hmm. and just put it on the front of the waist belt of the saddle. And then I'm just able to use that pouch to carry like essentials, like anything I would want to have at easy reach and not have to go into a pack to get, like utility hook. Like you climb the tree and then you get to the point where you're ready to hang your stuff. Like just having that utility hook right at the front of your hip, where you're able to just undo a zipper, grab that thing, strap it around the tree. Then you can take your pack off and you got someplace to hang it. Mm-hmm. Just doing something like that has been helpful in the overall process. Being able to carry sticks up the tree. One of the things that I added to my saddles are just like little plastic hooks. Like you could buy at any, like a backpacking store like REI, or even like a Fleet Farm type of place. You can usually find just those little cheap plastic hooks. Just break the the little gates off of them, and then I just used zip ties to connect them to the mesh on the saddle. And then that little hook serves as a place where I can hang my sticks from with a piece of like small paracord or something like that, so that when I climb up the tree, I'm able to have a climbing stick at my hip level, so I can make one trip up the tree and I don't have to kind of go back down and get stick number 3 and 4.
That's awesome, because that's actually one of my biggest pet peeves I have yet to figure out how to make happen seamlessly. Is the just even whenever before I started saddle hunting, even with a tree stand, it was like that was always the biggest pain, was trying to figure out how I'm going to effectively get my sticks up and me up the tree at the same time without like having a bunch of crap just kind of like stuck to me from just odd places. You know what I mean? I tried like everything imaginable, to tying it off to my harness, to like, you know, tying it to anything that I was taking up with me, tying it to like a whatever the case was, right? I was just, there was a bunch of different ways, and every one of them was either noisy or I ended up dropping it. Like that was always like the two fails. I never thought of doing that, but so have you found that to be pretty effective?
Oh yeah, works great. And those plastic hooks, like that's one way to do it. There's also another thing that I learned from John Reed, who has JX3 Outdoors. He's the owner of that. On his hybrid saddle, he has these little multi-purpose D-ring locking hanging hooks, I believe they're called, on Amazon. And basically he has, you know, the same type of MOLLE system where you're able to kind of, it's modular enough where you can take any of the kind of MOLLE accessories that already exist in the world and adapt them to the saddle or the harness. And those little plastic things, you can mate them perfectly to the MOLLE loops that a lot of these saddles have. And then that also allows you to have either a closed or an open hook. So if you're afraid of like losing something, you can actually close that hook up in the shape like a D. Or you can have it open. The way he actually had it on his system was he had 2 of them side by side. And if you had them opened up on one side of your hip, you could actually hang your bow from it, from the string. And then your bow is just kind of hanging from your hip. And then you don't have to reach up to grab your bow. It's just right at hip level, and it's nice, easy to get to. Or you could use something like that for hanging your sticks or hanging any other piece of gear, and you can close it up. I used them also for daisy chaining up my tether and my lineman's rope, and just putting them in the hooks and closing them up. You don't have to worry about losing them. Just another alternative to using something like a dump pouch or a cis hauler or something like that.
Yeah. So that's some good information for me, because those are literally the things I've been kind of trying to figure out here toward the end of the year. After a full season of being in the saddle, it's like I started figuring out things that don't work, things that do work, and that was kind of like my next step was to try to streamline my approach. Because the thing is like it's all in your process and your setup too, right? It's like once you get a system down, you have things where you need them to be when you need them to be there. It just makes it that much, you know, easier, and you become that much more quiet, and then the hunting style becomes that much more effective. But the other part that I'm kind of fooling with now, and this is the part that I was saying that my wife isn't super thrilled about me getting my DIY on with certain things, because I'm going to change up my climbing method this year. So I'm curious from you, what is your favorite climbing method? Be it, you know, we can talk about it from a saddle perspective, but then also a tree stand perspective. What approach do you prefer? Well,
for me, it's the same, saddle versus tree stand, so that'll be easy. My favorite for climbing is a climbing stick that has roughly 24 or 25 inch length, double step, and just 2-step. So like the sticks that I made, or like Dan Infalt sticks, along with a movable aider. That is kind of my favorite overall climbing system that I've sort of settled on. It locks to the tree nice. You got good stability. You can use it on various different tree types, leaning trees. And just having the one loop aider allows you to sort of move it up as you go, so you're not in kind of a position where if you have too many steps on an aider, I feel like it almost, for me anyway, reduces your ability to stay stable. Because like last year I tried the 5-step aider and it worked fine, but you get to some of those trees where just you get into goofy situations with how they were leaning or something, and you just didn't. The sketch factor was a little bit higher,
right?
So having the one loop aider is kind of like a nice in between for me, where I've kind of settled on, and then you're able to move that up as you go, so that by the time you actually get up to hunting height, you don't have an aider loop hanging off of each of your stick, kind of swaying around in the wind. So that overall system, usually for me, 3 sticks, I'd say is probably 80% of what I would do. If I know I only need like 1 or 2 sticks, that's all I'll bring. But if I'm just going in blind, usually 3. And if I know I would need 4, then I'll bring 4. But I'd say 3 sticks with the one one-step movable aider is probably my go-to.
Okay.
If I know I'm going to be in a situation where it's really tough to walk, or I want to kayak in or something like that, then I oftentimes will go to like the wild edge steps with an aider method, just because it can fit them inside my pack. So there's a lot less risk of like catching on, like buckthorn or something else you might be trying to bushwhack through. And it's just a lower overall profile.
Right. That's interesting. So 3 sticks. How heavy are your sticks? Just out of curiosity.
They're a hair under 2 pounds, probably like 1 pound 10 ounces, I think, or 1 pound 12 ounces, somewhere in there with the rope and the stall strips and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. And so you're using a 1-step movable aider. What's the spacing between sticks? Roughly.
Between sticks. Well, with the 2-step aiders, I know it was 8 feet. For each new stick that I would put on would give me an additional 8 feet with the 2-step aider. So the 1-step aider, it's probably closer to like 6.5.
Okay.
In terms of like, 6.5 foot if you're using 1 stick, 13 feet for 2 sticks, 19.5 for 3.
Okay. And so when you're using a 1-step, you're using an actual 1-step aider and not a nader, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Because my thought process for me this year was I was going to actually try what you were talking about, which you suggested. The sketch factor was a little high, which was I'm planning to use wild edge steps with a 5-step aider and a nader. That way I can kind of clip onto the next step, pull the aider off and clip it to my belt or clip it to my my saddle, and then step on top of the step, and bring my aider up with me, and then clip it, put up another step, then clip the aider to the next step. So, but what you're saying is like, I totally get what you're saying. I was talking to Greg about this, and he was mentioning it too. He was like, when you get trees that are a little squirrely, he was like, then you don't have a place to dig your toe into the side of the tree to give you that stability. And I was just thinking about that as well, where it's like when you have your lineman's belt on and you're trying to use both hands, it's like you kind of almost have to have your hands on the tree to kind of keep yourself steady, as you're climbing, it seems like. But so yeah,
I mean, and some of the challenges come with like if you're trying to use any of those methods, some of them require you to climb above your top handhold, and anytime you have to do that, it becomes a little bit riskier.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like with the climbing stick, you pretty much you're able to have something solid the whole way up. Even because like if I'm using just a 1-step aider, I'm able to climb so that my feet are on the bottom step of the stick. And then I can almost even just wrap my knees around the top step. And then I'm able to, from that position, reach and put my next stick up as high as I can reach and just kind of go on from there. And it seems to work pretty well. It's pretty stable.
Right. I might have to give that a try because I had considered the 2-step stick, but was kind of leaning from it because I'm just trying to make my pack as light as possible because I'm trying to get into a smaller pack.
Gotcha.
Which has been kind of driving me a little bit crazy, which was kind of what the genesis for wanting to change my climbing style in general. Because right now I was just using Lone Wolf sticks, which are a little heavy. You know what I mean? I have rope mods on them and stuff like that, but they are, I think they're 2 pounds without any of the straps on them. Then you add the rope mods to them, they're still just a little over 2 pounds. So I was hoping to shave some of that weight off just to make my pack a little lighter, and so I could reduce the pack size. But for my diving into my nader development, since the wife thinks this has a high sketch factor, any tips for building one of those?
Do you have any sewing experience?
So my sewing experience comes from 7th grade whenever when we all had to take a home economics class. That's the extent of my sewing experience.
Gotcha.
So not high.
I don't have any major tips other than just following the instructions that other people have used to put them together. I would just say make sure that you're using, like high quality thread, like not just cheap, cotton thread or whatever is whatever you can get at Walmart. Make sure you're using something that's made for gear, made for, tying together webbing and that type of thing, as kind of a minimum.
Yeah. So I think what I ended up picking up was, I think Greg recommended polyester upholstery thread, I think is what he was recommending for me to use. So I'm going to give that a whirl, and I have some tubular webbing that I picked up, and then I'm actually going to use the hook from your Lone Wolf I guess hang set where you can kind of hang the hook in the tree, and then you have like it's always set there. So I'm going to use that for the top piece of it to kind of clip onto the step. So I'm hoping that those few pieces will do me good, and that my sewing holds up. That's the only part that I'm like questioning is my sewing capabilities. And I like how Greg says that like it's not sewing whenever you're doing it with saddle hunting. It's injecting thread.
Yeah.
Makes it just seem a little more manly, I guess. But so now that we got our climbing method kind of pulled together, right, and we're figuring out how we're getting into the tree and stuff. Do you have any tips or DIY ways of like building gear hangers or to get things into the tree without necessarily using screw ins? Just because on public land, a lot of places you're not able to use screw ins. So what are you doing in those cases?
Yeah, so I've done a few various like DIY methods of hanging gear, but then HME came out with a little utility belt that actually works pretty well. It's like $8 or something at Fleet Farm. It's just a cam buckle strap that has up to 5 injection molded little J-shaped hooks that go onto it. And I usually just keep 2 hooks on, one for my bow, one for my pack. And I put that thing just about as high as I can reach. And the only change that I've made to it is instead of just having that normal cam buckle strap where you have to thread the tag end of the webbing through it and then cinch it tight, I went ahead and sewed a flat hook onto the end of one of the webbings, and then I just used that cam buckle as kind of a sliding component. So then that way I'm able to just kind of loop the flat hook into the end of that cam buckle and then pull the strap tight, as opposed to having to feed the whole length of webbing through. So that's just been a little minor thing. It requires a little bit of sewing, but again, it's like low risk sewing because it's not something that's holding up your body weight.
Right. Yeah, as opposed to my highly sketch sewing factor that I'm going to embark on. That's interesting. I started using something similar to, I don't know if it's the same brand. These are metal hooks, I believe, and I soundproofed them all, and it's actually been a game changer for me. But I actually use I think I actually picked this up from you, if I'm not mistaken. But I actually make another tether out of some 550 cord with like a small prosciutto on it, and then I have my pack, which will have a carabiner on it, and I'll just use that to kind of hang on that small self-made tether. That way I can kind of move my pack up to like my height. That way when I'm getting my stuff out, when I first get in a tree, it's there, and then once I get everything out, I just take it and I slide it down, because I usually like my pack to hang down around like my knee. That way it's not in the way for me to take to get a shot around the tree in the saddle. So that's kind of like the little hack that's the extent of my hacking ability. I guess is I made a fake little tether.
Yeah, well, if I figure out a way that I'm satisfied with to eliminate a camera arm, then I might not even climb up the tree with my pack. I may just leave it at the base of the tree and just use it solely as a means of carrying in my climbing method and carrying in any extra clothes, and then packing out a deer potentially. And then I'll be able to have a lot more exposed and open, kind of system up in the tree and more freedom of movement.
Yeah, that would be choice. I've had stuff at the base of the tree, but it's typically been because it's fallen out at some point during the hunt. So that's been my methodology for keeping things at the base of the tree. I want to move to packs here, because as I was saying, like that's probably like one of the places that's one of my biggest pain points at this point, is just the size of the pack that I'm using because of the stuff that I'm carrying. So what pack have you found that works best for saddle hunting? And then is there anything that you found that you like particularly for stand hunting?
Yeah, so for saddle hunting, kind of the 2 packs that I've used and seem to work pretty well. One is the Mystery Ranch pop-up pack. They come in 2 sizes, an 18 liter or a 28 liter. 28 seems to be more popular. You can carry more clothes or just more overall gear in it. The 18 is usually enough for kind of a minimalist hunter if you're fine putting your clothing in the load shelf. Each of those packs are also, so the idea behind that pop-up pack is that you have a nice small kind of minimalist looking day pack size, but then if you want to be able to haul heavier loads, you can adjust a couple of the straps, kind of peel away the top end of the pack from the frame, and then kind of extend or pull up some additional load lifters to be able to then use that pack as a load shelf. And you can carry up to around 75 pounds or so, be able to haul that load in addition to the small day pack. So it makes it nice from that aspect if you do want to be able to carry a deer out. Otherwise, like a more minimalist style pack is going to be fine if you don't need that ability.
Mm-hmm.
So the Cabela's Elite Scout 1800 pack, I use that one quite a bit over the last year, and it works really just fine for being able to carry just kind of your essentials and your necessities. For being able to carry the sticks, what I would typically do, no matter what type of pack it is I'll just kind of lay them sideways on the outside of the pack, and then either use the straps on the outside of the pack or use night-eyes gear ties to just kind of hold them in place. And I really haven't had any issues in doing that with the stick sliding around or making noise or anything like that, or hitting me in the back of the head.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of how I was carrying my sticks this year. It was on the outside of an Alps pack, but it was more of a full Western pack, which was just getting into a tree with it was just kind of a pain. It was just too big. So I need something that's just a little smaller than that. Now you were saying you put your sticks on the outside. Did you at one point make a video where you also carry them on the inside of it by kind of like clipping them together with some night eyes just to kind of keep them tight in there so they're not moving around? Or was that something else I was watching?
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways of skinning the cat. You can kind of carry them inside and then zip up the zipper so the zipper's like 90% closed and it's just kind of the sticks that are poking out the top.
Right.
That's one way of doing it. I found that after doing it a whole bunch, I typically like just putting the camera gear and like an extra like fleece or something like that inside the pack, and then just putting the sticks on the outside, because once you get to the base of the tree, the first thing you do is take your sticks off. So if they're on the outside, you don't have to move anything else around.
Right. So speaking of camera gear, any self-filming tips for some DIY hacks for self-filming? Because I go back and forth with this, where it's like sometimes I take a camera, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I really like it, sometimes the camera just makes me angry, so I end up leaving it at home.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, anything camera arm related, whether it's a stand or it's a saddle, definitely makes life a little bit tougher. So I mean, what I've typically done is I'll have that camera arm and I usually modify whatever arm segments come with the camera arm. Like with my 4th Arrow one, I made a custom arm that was 2 segment, and the top segment was a few inches shorter than the bottom segment. So that allows me to not have the shotgun mic hit the tree when I'm passing the arm from one side to the other, kind of underneath the bridge. That's one that if you're saddle hunting will make life a little bit easier. Right. But beyond that, I mean, the biggest thing, and if you saw my videos last year, you noticed that a lot of the actual shot footage that I had was from the head cam. And some of that was unintentional, where I just, I wanted to have either the main camera was out of focus or the aim was a little bit off or something like that, where I didn't really have great footage with that main camera arm, and the head cam sort of saved the day. So that kind of got me thinking, well, if I can get a better head cam setup, I might just be able to ditch the camera arm. So that's kind of been one of my pet projects over the last few months, and even probably leading up into next season will be, can I get a really decent quality setup with being able to ditch the camera arm, ditch all of the inconveniences that come with setting up a camera arm, and be able to utilize the saddle to its fullest potential in terms of being able to move around the tree.
Right. And how's that coming? Because I did notice that actually in your videos, and I was like, so what is that setup for your head cam?
Well, so what I did last year is I had a Sony FDR X3000, which is their latest action camera. It's actually a couple of years old. They haven't really come out with a new model of it yet, but it has pretty decent image stabilization. It's a little bit better. It's not quite all just electronic image stabilization. There's actually like a small amount of mechanical stabilization that's going along with it. And with that setup, since it's filming in 4K, you can have it zoomed out all the way, and it looks like a good third-person camera view, like what you'd think of with a GoPro or something like that.
Right.
You're able to kind of see what you're doing. But then since it's also 4K, you can crop in a little bit and still have pretty decent-looking footage.
Right.
So you're kind of able to bounce back and forth between kind of that big, wide first-person view and a little bit tighter cropped view where you're able to get a little bit better footage of the shot or anything else you might be looking at. It's still not going to be as good as like zooming in with an actual optical zoom on a camcorder that's set on a camera arm. So you're losing out for sure on anything that's further away. But for like the close-up stuff inside of 20 yards, it seems to work pretty decent. And what I'm probably going to move to is something with a little bit tighter field of view. like the Osmo Pocket that they just came out with.
Okay.
That one's got an 80-degree field of view, and it films in 4K 60. And it's got a gimbal built in. So the stabilization is better than anything you're going to see on any other action camera. It's got a little bit tighter field of view, and you still got that nice high resolution and capabilities for slow motion. So the testing I've been doing with that so far, it's a little bit more difficult to use. Right? It's not like as bulletproof as like an action camera, but the footage you're able to get, I think, is definitely superior. So that's what I'm kind of leaning towards as a head cam, is to be able to use that camera, and then probably have one camera that's bow mounted, and then one camera that is up in the tree, kind of on that utility strap facing down. And that'll probably be the camera that I have my microphone plugged into. So I can get kind of a, not maybe necessarily a full shotgun mic, but maybe something that's close where I'm able to get a little bit more of the surrounding sounds.
Yeah.
So it'll be good enough to be able to get like the leaves crunching if a deer's walking in or that type of thing. And I'll probably also still have a lav mic for interview type stuff. And that Osmo also has some unique functionality in terms of being able to, since it has its mechanical gimbal, it's able to move itself. You can actually like hook it up to the app, set the camera down, and then from a remote location you can control where the camera is angled. You can do, you know, moving time lapses. You can do active track, so like you can be standing, you know, 15 yards away from the camera, have it active track on you, and then walk from one location to another, and the camera will actually follow you. It'll turn by itself. So there's definitely some cool tech in that thing, and you know, there's some limitations in terms of what it's overall capable of. It's not going to give you professional image quality or fantastic low light, but that's kind of the direction that I'm headed in. If I'm able to get that type of system, that would be able to get me, you know, a couple of different decent views and be able to piece them together and still be able to tell a really good story.
Yeah.
And still always get the kill shot on film.
Right. Man, that's awesome. That is like, I don't know that I would have the mental aptitude to take care of all of that in a tree to make sure all that's running in a tree. It's just, you know, dude, if you can pull that off, that'd be killer. I would definitely want to see what happens with your head camera, because that part, whenever I saw that the other day, I was like, that is a great idea. And I was like, I got to talk to him about that, because I love filming my hunts. I love going back and rewatching, like, just, you know, even if I'm not shooting anything, it's like just watching whenever I see deer, just kind of watching the videos of them, especially if it's bucks. I like to kind of go back and watch and see what they were doing and stuff like that. But I just kind of struggle with it, because it's just 9 times out of 10, it's such a pain for me to do that. I'm like, I'm just leaving the camera at home today. It's not even going to take it. So yeah,
I'll show you. I'll send you a text of a YouTube video that I have unlisted right now, some of the sample footage from that Osmo on a head mount. I think you'll be pretty surprised.
Sweet. Yeah, you'll definitely have to send me that, because if I can figure out a way to conveniently and easily pick up some good footage, then I would totally be into doing something like that, because I'm going to Iowa next year, and I definitely want to film my hunt in Iowa. So short of like finding a friend to tag along and hang in a tree with me for like 2 weeks, I'm probably going to be on the self-film trip. But
yeah, well, ease of use, the Sony's going to be probably your best bet, or something similar to it.
Right.
That Sony on like a Solvid head cam, because you don't have to worry about the thing, like it's one button to turn it on. Tacticam's kind of a similar thing. Just when you're using that as a head cam, since it is a tighter view, you have to be really critical in terms of what direction it's pointing. Whereas the Sony, since it's a wider field of view, you got a little bit more wiggle room there.
Right.
And you might not be cropped in as tight, but you're a lot less likely to actually miss the thing you want to capture.
Right. Yeah. So what are your? I know you're working on the camera piece that we just talked about. So what are your kind of handful of hacks that you're working on, or DIY things you're working on for this year, for this upcoming year?
Yeah. So we talked about the filming setup. One thing I just did over like the last week is to try a different stick attachment method with using smaller AM steel rope, like 1/8 inch AM steel or 7/64 AM steel, to be able to splice up a daisy chain to use a stick attachment, as opposed to like a cam strap, or as opposed to like a big piece of AM steel for the rope mod. And I'm actually going to be uploading a video on that in the next couple days, just to sort of compare that to everything else that I've tried. And apart from that, building a teepee probably for us going out to Colorado next year.
Oh, nice.
I've been I almost did it a couple of years ago. I bought all the materials and ended up not going through with it. But I've been talking with Carl Koseth quite a bit, who's now the chief designer at Tethered. And he's built a ton of them, and he has a ton of great experiences and notes and stuff like that. So I'm probably gonna take the plunge and build one of those.
That's awesome.
Stabilizer for my bow. So what I'll probably do for the compound, I made something that was just kind of like a simple proof of concept. Where are you familiar with the equalizer?
Yeah.
So I made something just kind of out of a hacked up old Alpine soft lock quiver that kind of did the job. And it actually worked pretty decent. I liked it. But what I did now is I'm making just a more streamlined version of it, where I'm able to just carry 3 arrows, have them basically as streamlined as I can get it, and the exact right length that I want it, with a piece of aluminum bar that I'll put stealth strips over the top of. And I'll be able to use that, I think, as kind of my stabilizer and quiver when I go out to Colorado this year.
That's pretty cool.
I think in season for whitetails, we'll see. I might use more of the longbow this year than I did last year, but we'll see.
Nice. So you have a few projects. In other words, I'm interested to see how the TP works out, man. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's the
I'm looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to sewing it. That's going to be a lot of work, but I'm looking forward to using it.
Yeah, sewing it is going to be it's going to be way above my thread injecting capability. We'll put it that way. What material are you using for that? Are you using canvas or?
No, it'll be a still nylon.
Okay, interesting. And
it's a lot lighter weight than canvas.
Okay, and I guess so. If you're going to be packing into Colorado to hunt, you don't want to carry that. What are you using for your supports?
There'll be just one center pole, essentially. So there's a couple different ways you could go about that. One would just be finding like a really large, like a big branch, essentially, which is probably like the least likely thing that I would do. More likely they have a bunch of center poles for existing shelters. Like there's one company, I think Seek Outside, makes a carbon fiber one that's made for that type of shelter. Kafaru has an aluminum center pole. I think even Easton, you can buy segments of their 7075 T9 aluminum and be able to create your own center poles that are adjustable. So those are all options and kind of the more popular things. So with like a teepee style shelter, you just need that one center pole, and then you just stake around the corners.
Right.
And then I'll probably have a stove too. I might not make the stove. I'll probably buy the stove, but a titanium wood stove. So there'll be a stove jack, or like a jack for the stove to be able to exit the top of the shelter.
Yep. And
then we'll be able to throw in some wood and be able to kind of dry our stuff out at night.
Nice. Is that for an elk hunt? Elk and muleys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. That'll be killer, man. So I'll be looking forward to seeing the videos of you, one, building that, and then 2, living out of it. That'll be super cool. All right, man. So I've had you here about an hour. I want to be sensitive to your time. We're here on the weekend time, and I'm sure you have some other things you want to dive into, maybe some other DIY projects you want to spend some weekend time working on. But before I let you go, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a story, something that's memorable. It could be something that, you got a kill on, or it could be just something where you learned a valuable lesson, but the floor is yours.
Sure. So take it back a few years, on a hunt that I went on in northern Minnesota, in kind of a region where you're starting to transition into more of that boreal type forest, where it's not farmland by any stretch of the means. You got a combination of like big wood swamps and higher ground that's covered in like maples and aspens and that type of thing, kind of just rolling terrain. And the way we would typically hunt that during the rut is we would look for transition areas, whether it's transition areas along the swamp or transition areas from kind of open areas to some of that high ground. And the first weekend of this hunt, I remember it was just crazy windy, like sustained 20 to 30 mile an hour winds. And we all just went down low. As close as we could get to the swamp, you just get thick into those evergreens to cut down on the wind. And we did see, a fair amount of deer. Some were, moderately sized, nothing huge. But then immediately after that, kind of the wind just dropped off and went back down to normal. And we're still kind of hunting down those lower areas and started to see fewer and fewer deer. So I started moving out into the more open high ground area and trying to pick up on some areas where it's still close to the swamp, but places where I was able to see a little bit further into the woods. Once I made that move, I was able to see a few bucks moving up higher and higher on that open terrain. So then again, that same day, I moved, got closer to where I had seen deer moving earlier in the morning, set up, saw another deer moving even higher up in the elevation, got down, moved again. So it's like the second move that I've rehung that tree stand in the same day, and ended up finding an area that was close to some evergreens and high ground, which is pretty rare to find in that type of habitat. So then I hunted there for the last night, ended up seeing like one smaller buck, but I was like, you know what? I'll just go right back here the next morning. And so that's what I did. And that next morning at like 10:30 a.m., I ended up shooting still the largest buck that I've shot that came through that area. And so kind of the lesson there was, that was one of the first major hunts where I was ultra mobile and just kind of on the fly, not getting glued to any particular spot based on things that I had seen in the past, and just trying to stay as up to date as possible. And by following each of those individual deer that I had seen moving, I was able to eventually get to a spot that was primed for the location of, what the weather was doing that particular day. And for all I know, maybe there was a hot doe that had walked through there, the day prior or something. But if I hadn't kind of taken the lessons from what I'd seen those deer doing previously, I wouldn't have known to move. Or if I would have just stayed glued to the original spot where we saw those deer moving in the high wind areas, I may never have even seen that deer. So that was kind of a big lesson for me early on in how effective mobile hunting and adapting on the fly can be.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice way to kind of go full circle in this podcast, because we kind of started off talking about that mobile hunting and not being glued to a spot, and reading sign and trying to get on the most recent intel and hunting that most or that hottest sign, and having the confidence to kind of believe what you were seeing and make that move. That's cool, man. Yeah, it's always nice whenever you kind of when you follow the rules, if you will, and then you get rewarded. You know what I mean? There's plenty of times where we make moves and it just doesn't work out. It's always nice when the deer also reads the script. But before I let you go here, man, if you wouldn't mind, tell everyone out there listening where they can find out more about you and catch some of your DIY hacks.
Yeah, so you can find me by searching DIY Sportsman, either in Google or YouTube. You'll be able to find most of my content on YouTube, but then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook as well. And then I also have a podcast that I co-host with Bobby Boswell on the Sportsman's Nation Network. So if you search the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network, the whitetail themed one, on any of your typical podcast listening apps, you'll be able to find that podcast as well.
Awesome, man. Thanks for joining. Be sure to check out his Garrett's Places, where he has all of his DIY information. The YouTube channel is invaluable, anyway, especially for anyone out there who's looking to change the gear and make some modifications themselves, or if you're looking to get into saddle hunting, looking for climbing methods. I mean, you do a good job of testing just about any and every opportunity, as far as gear goes, and how to get into the woods, as well as all your hunting videos too. So thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate you spending some time with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I want to thank Garrett for joining. Be sure to check out the DIY Sportsman on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'll, of course, put the links to those places in the blog post show notes. Would, of course, like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast while you're there. We'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those two things for us. And before we shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Skull Brew Coffee, Wicked Tree Gear, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Trophy Ridge, Ozonics, Obsession Bows, Glacier Coolers, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see you.
Makes me proud, makes me steal. I could show you through the door. I ain't welcome anymore. A long time coming, if it all. It takes a special knowing to colorful. Damaged heads.